With this video, we're going to explore the issue of transactional correctness. Transactional correctness really is a deeper exploration into the whole issue of intent. We've argued prior to this that you can, in a sense, reduce intent to two essences. There's the intent to get and there's the intent to give. We have argued also that the things that we pursue in our lives, like security, fulfillment, power, and harmony, are all the product of the intent to give. The degree to which you construct your intent on the basis of what you're giving in any moment that you're in is the degree to which you achieve security, fulfillment, power, and harmony in your life. The issue, though, about this idea of the intent to give is that it's really not just about being nice, because very often people get the sense that if you ask them to be here to give, they're always going to be sweet and tractable and, in a sense, weak. And in fact, the intent to give is not about being nice. The intent to give is about being appropriate. And that sense of appropriacy we refer to as giving each situation its due. And what this means is that in any situation that you're in, you can construct your intent on the basis of what would be expedient to you or what the situation requires of you. And what that situation requires of you can actually be related to or reduced to two core kind of categories or classes. The first category you could call generosity. And that's what happens, for instance, when a hungry child asks you for food. And clearly the appropriate thing to do would be to give the child food. The second category of giving you could call courage. And that is what happens, for example, if you come across a drama in a park where a little old lady is being beaten up by a thug, and you intervene to beat up the thug and to save the little old lady. Clearly, the second interaction isn't pleasant, but it requires courage of you. And if you ask yourself which one of these two actually ask you to give the most, clearly it's courage, because when you're being generous, you're just putting things associated with yourself on the line, whereas when you're being courageous, you're actually putting yourself on the line. Now, although courage asks a higher price than generosity, it is important to note that, in fact, generosity is, if you like, the primary element of what being here to give means. Because clearly, if your fundamental attitude to the world is affirming, you're here to serve or give, then your first engagement with the other would not be confrontative. The first engagement with the other would be kind or affirming. So it suggests that of the two elements of generosity and courage, generosity is the primary element and courage is the secondary element. Now, furthermore, what's important about these two attributes of generosity and courage is that they really are things that you do. They're concerned with acting in the world or acting in the outward. It's like when you look out at the world, this is how you transact with or engage the world. What's very important about this engagement, though, is that it's virtually impossible to give each situation its due if you're not seeing things as they are. Seeing things as they are and giving each situation its due are mutually enabling. Clearly, what prohibits you from being able to see things as they are or give the situations due is that you appraise things inappropriately because there's all sorts of stuff going on in your mind. In order to be able to act appropriately, you first got to see the thing appropriately, which means you've got to clarify the internal noise that's going on, so that in a sense you have a clear reflective space that then enables you to see the situation as it is and therefore give the situation its due. Which means to say that the skill, if you like, of giving each situation its due is predicated on another skill, which is seeing things as they are. And these two things are mutually enabling. If you see things as they are, you are able to give the situation its due clearly. However, if you're giving the situation its due also enables you to see things as they are. An example of this is if you really misbehave in an interaction with somebody and you kind of move away from that interaction really steamed up and upset, it is unlikely that you'll go into the next situation kind of present in the next situation. You'll still have part of yourself trapped in an internal drama relating to the last engagement. That piece of the last engagement that's kind of occupying your attention in the new situation that you're in limits your ability to be available in the new situation. which means to say you're unlikely to see the new situation as it is and therefore give the new situation its due. Which means giving the situation its due and seeing things as they are mutually enable each other. The one sets up the other. Further to this, if we say that giving each situation its due has these two attributes of generosity and courage, the question is, what is the inward equivalent of those two attributes? Now, the inward equivalent of generosity is gratitude. Clearly, gratitude means I recognize that I've been given in excess of my due. I have a sense of an overflowing sense to my life. And this sense of overflowing creates the conditions where it's easy for me to give away. It's a full heart that's got something to give. This is also easy to understand in the inverse. The opposite of gratitude is resentment. If gratitude says I've been given excess of my due, resentment says I've not been given my due. And if I don't think I've been given my due, it's really difficult for me to give somebody else anything at all other than a kick in the teeth. So my gratitude and my generosity enable each other. Just like my gratitude enables my generosity also enables my gratitude. And the question is, well, how should that be the case? And clearly, if I cultivate the habit of being generous, it means I become acquainted firsthand with the experience of giving something to give it away, because that's what generosity means. In other words, I know that it is possible for somebody not to give conditionally, not to give in order to get something. That's not generosity, that's an investment. I become acquainted with the idea of being genuinely generous, of giving to give away. Because I know that it is possible to give away, when I see somebody else giving to me, when I see somebody else being generous with me, I don't read a conditional contract in that. I don't see that they're giving in order to get something out of me. I recognize that they're giving unconditionally. Which means my ability to give generously creates the conditions where I can start reading the unconditional intent of somebody else. And that being able to read the unconditional intent for somebody else creates the conditions for me to be grateful. Clearly, if somebody's making an investment with me when they're giving, this is not a reason for gratitude. This is a reason for finding out what I owe them. So generosity and gratitude are mutually enabling. My gratitude enables my generosity. My generosity enables me to start learning to see that other people are indeed unconditional with me, and therefore I can be grateful to them. The inner equivalent of courage is trust. There's a very useful little exercise that helps us to understand this, and this is the sort of classical blindfold falling exercise that we have in corporate team building exercises. So we assume you've got a circle of people who are surrounding a person in the middle, and the person in the middle is asked to fall. Clearly the person is not going to know if the other people, if he's not necessarily going to trust that the people on the periphery of the circle are going to catch him. He has to take a risk. He has to take a courageous step. That courageous, if he takes the courageous step and his colleagues catch him, he earns a little bit of trust. Now that he trusts them a bit more, it is able for him to take a second courageous step, which means to say the person's courageous act enables their trust, and their trust enables their courage. Again, these are mutually enabling things. Now, what's important about these two attributes of generosity and courage is that they aim in opposite directions, if you like. The primary element of gratitude and generosity are really concerned with dealing with the past. Clearly, if I'm grateful, I'm looking at what has happened. And also, when I'm generous, in a sense, I'm giving away what I have accumulated. When I trust, I'm looking forward. I trust that things will go well. When I'm being courageous, I'm not running away as the enemy come over the hill. Which means to say that trust and courage look forward, they look to the future. And gratitude and generosity look at the past. Now, there's a very significant implication to this. What this is suggesting, therefore, is that seeing things as they are has these two primary attributes, gratitude and trust. And these two elements, rather, of gratitude and trust, look in opposite directions. Gratitude looks at the past and trust looks at the future, which suggests that if I'm not looking at my past with gratitude and I'm not looking at my future with trust, I'm not seeing things as they are. Furthermore, it also suggests that of these four transactional categories of trust, courage, gratitude, and generosity, gratitude is in fact the primary element. The rationale is the following. If I look at the past with gratitude, it is easy for me to give away. We've already said that a grateful heart has got something to give. If I look at the past with gratitude, because I know that I've been given in excess of my due, it is more likely that I will trust the world going into the future. That trust of the world going into the future means it's more possible for me to act courageously, which of all of these four attributes suggests that gratitude is the principal attribute or element of transactional correctness. What we've demonstrated so far is how the categories of transactional correctness relate to your own inwardness and outwardness. However, these categories don't just account for how your inwardness and your outwardness pattern, but they actually account for your relationship with the world or with the other in two senses. They account for how your relationship with the social other or other people pattern, and they also account for how your relationship with the totality of the other patterns. We are first going to examine how these categories relate to your engagement with the social other. So what really demonstrates the case is this blindfold falling exercise. So as we said before, you've got a circle of colleagues who are standing around a blindfold person in the middle. That blindfold person is told to fall, and the colleagues on the periphery will catch that person. Now, it's important to take note that it is, in fact, the people on the periphery who take responsibility for this exercise succeeding or failing. If they chose not to catch the person, then clearly the person would hit the ground. A precondition for the exercise working or succeeding is that the people on the periphery take responsibility for the exercise working. That sense of taking responsibility is courage. You see this sometimes in the blindfold falling exercise, where a very large person in the middle is plummeting down towards a very small person on the periphery. And that small person doesn't run away. They engage and try their best to stop the person in the middle falling. So clearly the whole exercise, the blindfold falling exercise, only works because the people on the periphery have the courage to catch the people who are falling. That courage that the people on the periphery demonstrate enables the person in the middle, the blindfold person, to trust. It is precisely because I throw myself forward and they catch me that I earn a little bit of trust. And it is an incrementally sort of enabling process. The trust of the blindfold person who falls enables the people on the periphery to take responsibility. It enables their courage. The very fact that they are courageous, that enables the trust of the blindfold falling person. On the level of gratitude and generosity, a similar sort of pattern becomes apparent, because clearly it is the people on the periphery who are generous towards the person in the middle. They take care of the person in the middle. The fact that they take care of the person in the middle creates the conditions where the person in the middle doesn't hit the deck. They are caught, and because they are caught, they become grateful towards the people on the periphery. Which means to say the generosity of the people on the periphery enables the gratitude of the falling person, and the gratitude of the falling person also actually enables the generosity of the people who are catching. This becomes apparent again if you consider the inverse. If a person walked into the middle of the circle with a sense of expectation, you better not drop me, the people on the periphery are almost intuitively programmed to want to drop the person. Now, that means to say that if you saw things as they are, you would recognize that other people, the social other, has given you, in a sense, wildly in excess of your due. That if you don't recognize, if you aren't grateful towards the social other, and you don't trust the social other, you are not seeing things as they are. This becomes apparent when you consider just our relationship with other people, and what, in a sense, what we owe other people. Clearly, other people have given us wildly in excess of our due. I mean, if you just consider the history of the shirt, we take something like a shirt really for granted, but there's a very long history associated with the shirt. 10,000 years ago, some very intelligent people discovered that you could take plant fibers and spin them into a yarn. And then sometime later, maybe 2,000 years after that, another group of very clever people discovered you could take this yarn and weave it into a fabric. And then sometime later, in sort of the 17th century, some other very clever English engineers discovered that you could discover the fine metallurgy and all the mechanical engineering to produce these massive mechanical looms that created the conditions where today every single human being alive, all 7 billion of us on the planet, wear woven fabric garments. And we don't pay a single cent of royalty to any one of these people, which suggests that just the shirt on your back has been such a collaborative effort of so many people over such a very long period of time that it would be impossible to pay them back just for that boon. And that's only the shirt on your back. If you consider how much we owe other people, it becomes apparent that that our lives have been invested in wildly in excess of what we could ever repay. And that investment has been the investment of other people. We have been given incredibly generously by other people. Not to have gratitude towards the social other is to, in a sense, do violence to the truth. We related this attribute of the courage of the other to the ability of the other to take responsibility for us. And that we can, in a sense, trust the social other going forward. Now, this has historically demonstrably been the case. So why shouldn't we be able to? There's a Xhosa expression and an African expression that says it takes an entire village to create a person, which means to say that all around us, there's a constant intervention by other people that enables our lives. The very fact that we can live in complex societies, that we don't take our lives in our hands every time we walk onto the street, that alone suggests that other people are responsible with regard to us. We are safe from them. If they were fundamentally malevolently disposed towards us, we would be in very serious trouble. If all 7 billion people on the planet were out to get you, it is unlikely that you would still be alive. Which means to say that we can trust the good auspices of the other, that the other does take responsibility for us. This this understanding of the good auspices of the social other with regard to us and how we should properly relate to this is because the attribute of this understanding of the good auspices of the other with regard to ourselves becomes apparent when we explore the difference between the following two transactions. Let's say I have a person who reports to me called Joe, and I say to Joe, in 1980, I did what you have to do now, just shut up and go and do what I did. And secondly, I have somebody reporting to me who's called Fred, and I said to Fred, in 1980, I did what you have to do now. It may be helpful to you, go and have a look at what I did. Clearly, Joe would reject what I was doing, and Fred would accept what I was doing. And if we asked ourselves why, it becomes apparent that there's a significant shift in my intent from the Joe to the Fred interactions. And in order to understand the shift of intent, you've got to separate two variables in your mind, means and ends. And you've got to put into those two categories either the person who's doing the job or the job that's being done. If we look at the Joe interaction, then clearly what I'm saying to Joe is that my end is to get the job done, and I'm going to use you, Joe, the person, as my means to get that job done. In the Fred interaction, if I say to Fred, in 1980 I did what you have to do, it may be helpful to take a look at it, clearly we could have a completely different outcome from what we had in 1980. That outcome could in fact be a disaster. Which means to say in the Fred case, my end is in fact to teach Fred something, and my means to teach him something is the job that he's doing. Now that inversion of means and ends indicates that there's been a fundamental shift in the intent of the engagement. If you ask yourself, who does Joe experience as the beneficiary of the engagement, then clearly it is me. From his point of view, I'm trying to take something from him. If you ask yourself, who does Fred experience as the beneficiary, then clearly the beneficiary is Fred. I'm trying to give him something. Now, if one asks oneself, if these were two reporting relationships, if these two people both reported to me, over a period of time, who would be likely to really work for me because he wanted to? And that would be Fred. Joe would only work for me because he had to. It's very important to understand that if you work for somebody because you want to, you're really giving that person the right to ask you to do things or to exercise power over them. Which means to say, of the two transactions, it is in the Fred transaction where Fred is likely to work for me because he wants to. It's in the Fred transaction where I'm likely to have power. In the Joe transaction, I don't have power. In the Joe transaction, I'm trying to control the outcome. Which means to say, power and control are actually mutually opposite things. And you only have power to the degree to which you're willing to forego control. That means to say that the patterning of our transactional correctness with the social other has an attribute. It is only when I submit to acting in the best interest of the other that, in fact, the other grants me power. The implication of this is that the self can never own power. Power is always owned by the other. The other grants the self power. As soon as the self tries to take power, that power perverts because there's a loss of loyalty. And because there's a loss of loyalty, you no longer have power, you have control. This is how we can understand the Madiba magic. If we look at the core kind of criterion that the loyalty that people have towards Nelson Mandela comes from, it is because he submitted to what was fundamentally right for all South Africans. He could have come out of 20 years of imprisonment with an incredible sense of rancor and resentment, saying that he was going to get his own back against these awful whites. He didn't do that. He submitted to what was appropriate in the situation. He disciplined his own party in order to make sure that he gave what was appropriate. It is precisely because he was willing to submit to his sense of appropriacy that he became this iconic leader that everybody followed. Which means to say that Madiba's submission and his power became mutually enabling attributes. What is true for Madiba throughout his life, and certainly since his imprisonment, since the end of his imprisonment, was an incredible sense of the common touch, an incredible sense of real humility, and appreciativeness of all people around him, and the trust in the good nature of people. Now, finally, I'd like to explore what these categories of transactional correctness imply for our relationship, not just with the social other, but the totality of the other. In other words, the whole world, the whole other that surrounds us. So if you saw things as they are, then you would recognize that the universe, the other, has given you wildly in excess of your due. There's nothing that you have that you've produced in your own self. This is impossible. The blood that courses through your veins has come from other than you. The energy that you metabolize just to be able to listen to this video comes from other than you. Whatever you ate for your breakfast or your lunch or your supper, that is where the energy comes from that enables you to be able to give attention at all. And where that supper came from, let's assume you had a salad and a steak. Then what's inside you is a cow. There's some lettuce leaves, there's some minerals, there's some water, there's the light that was photosynthesized by the lettuce leaf, there's the grain that was eaten by the cow. There's a whole collection of things that have come from other than you that have made you. In other words, in that sense, you as the Buddhists say, you're empty of your own nature. Your own being is a gift that has been bequeathed to you by other than you. Your being is a light of attention that stands on a scaffold. This scaffold has taken all events since the beginning of time to be made. If you just took a step back, if it wasn't for the fact that your parents loved each other, then you wouldn't have been born. If it wasn't for the fact that speciation happened on the planet, you wouldn't be here. If it wasn't for the fact that life could have happened on the planet, you wouldn't be here. If it wasn't for the fact that the planet happened in the solar system, you wouldn't be here. If it wasn't for the Big Bang, there would have been a solar system, there wouldn't have been a planet, there would have been nothing. In other words, all events prior to now have conspired to make you you. It is almost as if the universe has taken a massive leap of faith, a great investment in us. And that investment requires us, in a sense, to not only trust the universe, but to submit to let it in. We have to recognize that we cannot control the universe we're in. It is massive, it is vast. And to get a real sense of that vastness, we have to kind of put ourselves in a place where we can really, in a sense, see things as they are, which is put yourself on a dark, starry night, looking out at the sweep of the sky and the stars. And if you had a sense of exactly how vast things are, you would be in a state of awe, because you would recognize that vastness and that significance and its expanse. It is almost as if the purpose of seeing, the purpose of there being a seer, is to be in a state of awe. So, if you saw things as they are, you would be deeply grateful, because you would recognize that the universe has made a fundamentally unconditional investment in you. You would trust life. You would see that life has taken a risk to enable you to be here. You would submit to life. You would submit to the vastness of the other. You wouldn't resist it, and that produces a sense of awe. If you don't have that sense of awe at how extraordinary and how magnificent and significant the world out there is, the only other alternative you would have is a sense of terror. Because there's two reasonable responses of that which is very small in the face of that which is overwhelmingly vast. It is either awe or it is terror. There isn't a third. Now, what makes the difference between awe and terror is that the small one, the one who is about to be overwhelmed, recognizes that it is not overwhelmed. It recognizes that this vastness that it confronts has a benign orientation towards the self. You know, the universe that you're in isn't hostile to you, it's quite the opposite. Not only is it not hostile to you, it's deeply benevolently disposed to you. It has given you wildly in excess of your due. Which means to say that if you don't recognize this, if you don't recognize that the world has given you in excess of your due, then you cannot trust that the world, in a sense, has a benign orientation to you. You will not want to submit to this vast power, because you would recognize that it is malevolent. In other words, the opposite of this experience of awe is an experience of terror. We have fundamentally there are one of two ways of being human: the way of awe and the way of terror. The output of a successful life is awe. The input to that successful life is gratitude. It is my gratitude that enables my trust of the universe, my submission to the universe, and therefore my awe. The inverse of gratitude is resentment. Resentment says the world is not good enough. It is mean. It is either mean or it is arbitrary. There is no justice to it. If I consider it to be arbitrary, I would not recognize that the generosity of the world. I'd not recognize the investment made in me. I would see the power as tyrannical, and I would see it as the whole world being almost a bizarre joke. I would have terror. So, the issue, the categories of transactional correctness are presented to us in three realms. First of all, in terms of your own inwardness and outwardness. Secondly, in terms of the self's engagement with the social other. And then thirdly, engagement with the self's engagement with the totality of the other, the engagement of the seer with the seen. The core to succeeding as a human being is to deliberately cultivate the attribute and the value of gratitude.